How long is a feature-length movie? Typically, anything over 40 to 60 minutes qualifies, though the standard today tends to be around 90 to 120 minutes. But back in the early 1910s, a movie that was just 2 or 3 reels long, a reel being about 10 to 15 minutes, was considered a huge, bold undertaking. Most movies were just a single reel in length, even shorter sometimes. So why were early filmmakers so reluctant to make longer movies? Well, for starters, exhibition wasn't really set up to screen longer films. Most theaters were small storefront Nickelodeons, charging just 5 cents admission. Their business model was based on spinning through audiences quickly with a constantly changing program of very short films. Not to mention the challenges involved with actually making a feature-length film at that time. Directors were still learning the basic vocabulary of editing, camera movement, lighting, and other techniques we take for granted today. Telling a coherent narrative that could sustain itself for 5,000 feet of film or more required a sophistication most filmmakers had yet to develop in 1912. Finally, there was the issue of money. Feature films required bigger budgets to pay for longer shooting schedules, expanded casts, and story rights. With their short shelf life on the exhibition circuit, recouping costs was a worry for early producers. Okay, now that we've set the scene, let's talk about the pioneering filmmakers who pushed the envelope and gave us the first feature-length films. One of the very first was actually an Australian production, a 1906 bushranger drama called The Story of the Kelly Gang. Running over an hour in length, it was groundbreaking for its time. But since only 18 minutes or so survives, most film historians don't consider it the first feature. So what do they consider to be the first true feature film then? Well, there's some debate, but most agree it's the French film L'assassinat du Duc de Guise from 1908, directed by Charles Le Bargy. Running at around 18 minutes, it was based on the 1588 assassination of the Duke of Guise and shot using actors from the prestigious Comédie Française theatre troupe. Now, I know what you're thinking. Just 18 minutes doesn't sound very feature-y. Keep in mind though that even 18 minutes was unusually long in 1908 when most films were just a couple of minutes if that. Le Bargy's creative gamble paid off big time. L'assassinat du Duc de Guise was a hit around the world, proving there was an appetite for longer narrative films. As a result, other pioneering filmmakers started to push boundaries. In Italy, companies like Cines and Ambrosio started churning out ever longer historical epics packed with spectacular production values. Movies like The Last Days of Pompeii and Nero or The Fall of Rome clocked in around 20 to 25 minutes in length. Across the Atlantic, the legendary D.W. Griffith directed his first 2-reel film, Enoch Arden, in 1911 while working for the Biograph Company. A few years before, Biograph had forced him to split one of his films, The Life of Moses, into multiple parts, just because it dared to be a little over 10 minutes long. Now they let Griffith release Enoch Arden intact, a sign of how quickly attitudes were changing. That brings us to 1912, which I would argue is the defining year for the emergence of feature-length films, both in America and Europe. Let me run through some of landmarks. In April, the French company Film d'Art releases Les Amours de la Reine Elisabeth, starring the divine Sarah Bernhardt as Queen Elizabeth I of England. At around 35 minutes, it was the longest narrative film produced up to that point. It was a huge worldwide hit, screened at legitimate theaters and opera houses rather than just Nickelodeons. In May, Adolf Zukor founds his famous Players production company in the US and acquires the exclusive American exhibition rights to Queen Elizabeth, which essentially launches his new studio. The film does so well that Zukor becomes convinced feature films are the future. He was right. In August, Universal Pictures releases the first multi-reel film series, What Happened to Mary, directed by Harold Lockwood. The 12-part serial runs over 2 hours in total, showing American filmmakers taking tentative first steps into feature film territory. In September, Carl Laemmle of Independent Motion Picture, IMP, promotes Florence Lawrence into cinema's first movie star through a series of publicity stunts in St. Louis. This kicks off the rise of the star system, which would become crucial to the success of feature films. In October, pioneering producer Thomas Ince innovates the central producer model at Inceville Studios that would later evolve into the classic Hollywood studio system. In November, Mack Sennett sets up Keystone Studios, which over the next decade produces wildly popular feature-length comedies starring Chaplin, Normand, Arbuckle, and others. And finally, in December, Cecil B. DeMille directs The Squawman, an unprecedented 74-minute-long Western drama. It becomes known as the first official Hollywood feature film, launching the career of DeMille, who of course goes on to even bigger and longer epics. That's a lot of big moment in one landmark year for the feature film. But perhaps the definitive movie of 1912, the one that shook the whole movie industry and led to the Hollywood system we know today, was an Italian historical epic called Quo Vadis. Directed by Enrico Guazzoni for the Cines Company, Quo Vadis was based on a popular 19th century novel by Henryk Sienkiewicz about romance and persecution in Nero's Rome. Guazzoni's lavish adaptation ran over 2 hours, requiring thousands of extras and huge sets recreating ancient Rome. When Quo Vadis premiered in April 1912, nothing like it had ever been seen before. Its epic length, massive spectacle, and sophisticated storytelling instantly made it a worldwide cultural phenomenon. Exhibitors were forced to abandon their short film programs and adopt reserved seat policies to accommodate the unprecedented running time. Instead of Nickelodeon's, Quo Vadis played at legitimate theaters and opera houses at premium prices. It was basically the first ever blockbuster, earning millions worldwide throughout 1912 and 1913. The major lesson the film industry took from Quo Vadis was that there was a huge audience out there ready to experience long-form stories on screen. If you gave them high production values, exotic locales, grand historic spectacles, and stars like Sarah Bernhardt, they would turn out in droves. The success of Quo Vadis proved that feature films were cinema's future. Soon, the short film format pioneered by Edison and early studios would fade away. Between 1912 and 1915, the American film industry reorganized itself from top to bottom to focus on feature production, distribution, and exhibition. That paved the way for Hollywood's golden age. While Quo Vadis awed audiences with its lavish scale, Griffith was busy inventing the building blocks of modern cinematic storytelling. Things like tracking shots, close-ups, cross-cutting between scenes, and complex editing techniques that allowed filmmakers to stretch stories over multiple reels. D.W. Griffith's role in pioneering feature-length films and cinematic language cannot be understated. In 1913, he topped Quo Vadis with the groundbreaking epic Judith of Bethulia. Just a year later, Griffith made The Birth of a Nation, considered one of the most culturally significant films ever for its innovations in editing and storytelling. Though a controversial figure, Griffith was crucial in shaping cinematic language during the transition from shorts to feature films. His bold vision tapped into cinema's potential and pointed the way forward. The emergence of the first feature-length films in 1912, like Quo Vadis, marked a pivotal moment in cinema history. Early filmmakers innovated bold new ways of storytelling that laid the foundations for the art form. Alright, that's a wrap for now. Hit like and subscribe to Unexplained Studios if you haven't already. I'll catch you guys in the next video.